Hello, welcome to 5 cool HTTP hacks with Flow for SharePoint. If you didn't see the intro video for this, click the link in the description. You might want to watch that first so that you understand the context that I'm working in today. So we're going to start with hack number 1. We do not, so if I were to do new, create from blank, and create from blank. Let's just put a button here as a trigger. Flow button. And then let's go look for SharePoint actions. You'll notice in our SharePoint actions, we don't have create list. We have create list item, we have create file, but we don't have create list. PlumSail does have create list, and so you can always use it, right? But that may be at cost, and so I'm going to show you how you can use the HTTPS request to do that. So I've actually made a few just to save time. We're going to start with the create list, okay? And I'm going to point out what I did. So this is something that I'm using myself. So I can just start it with a button on my phone and I can say, what's the list name I want, right? And then I can put the list name right here. FYI, if you edit this text, this is what you'll see when you run your flow. Please enter a list name, or you can do the desired list name. That's all that is. Then I actually put that in a variable. Now, you don't have to do this. It's not necessary to put in a variable. It can go from the trigger directly into the HTTP request. I just wanted to show you that you could put things here in a variable. For instance, let's say you asked for 2 inputs. You could concatenate them into a variable so that you could use 2 things to be your list name so that you make sure that your list names are all unique. But I just wanted to show you that. But this is optional. When you add the action HTTP request, and that's really easy, just hit add an action, type HTTP, and you'll see all of them. We're using send an HTTP request to SharePoint today. Really important that you choose this one, okay? Now that you've chosen that one, here's some things that I did. Let's kind of get a closer look at this. So first of all, I choose the site, and this is a post action. Why? Because we're going to end up with a new thing on SharePoint. If there's any edits on SharePoint, it's normally going to be post. And then I have a URI there, which is _API lists. Now, we talked about this in the last video, but basically, since we're manipulating lists, we're going to use _API lists, right? And this is one that we can use those default headers without a problem. These are like my 2 standard headers that I use all the time with this request. And we don't need, since we're not updating something, we don't actually need any other keys, right? We're creating something new. We're not updating. Sometimes when you update, you'll need some other headers, okay? Now, if you look at our description text, which I've pasted here into, well, actually, I pasted the other one. So let's paste this one into Notepad so we can look at it a little bit bigger. I find that when I'm zooming in demos, it can get really funky. So I'm gonna put it into this Notepad to make it easier to look at. Okay, and then here, let's see, can we make it big? Yeah, all right. So this, for those of us who have challenged eyes, is what I have in here. Now I'm using the variable for list name, so you can see that when I pasted it, put that in there. But basically, it's really like this, okay? Now, if I did this, exactly what you see right here, I would get a list called list name, right? I used a variable, so whatever's in the variable will be the name of my list. But here's the pattern I want you to notice here with the body. We're starting with this metadata, right? To let it know, here's the metadata, right? That you need, or the headers for this, right? And then there's 2 underscores. I know I've made mistakes and typed 1. You need 2 underscores. And then everything is kind of in these single quotes. It's important to remember not to use curly quotes. So be careful copying from like Word. And then you, right after the metadata, you indicate what type you're dealing with. Now, we are dealing with lists. And so one thing I'd like to keep pointing out to you is that usually your type and your URI are aligned, okay? So we're dealing with the SharePoint list type, and so our URI is _API/lists, okay? You'll start to see these patterns that will help you make less mistakes, okay? Now, after that, you have a base template. Now, this is an important little animal here because this is about what kind of list you will get. 100 is that default custom list. It's nothing special. It's just a custom list. But I do want to show you, and I'll put this link in the description as well. I'm going to do this on Edge because I have my bookmarks here. I am going to show you the list template types. So, and I'll put this link in the description. So that said base template 100. See this right here? This is base template 100, which is a custom list. If I wanted to make a library, it would be 101. Believe it or not, a library is a list, okay? Then I could choose a survey, I could do a links list. So these are all your different types of lists. So don't hesitate to change your list type. We'll actually make a task list type together as well. All right, so that's what that's about. Let's go back to Chrome where we were working. And I'm sorry, we were working in Chrome. Go back to Flow. You'll see that the next thing is allow content types true and content types enabled. This is optional. It will automatically by default be false, both of those. But I tend to use content types, and so I put them in here to remind myself to turn them on when I need them, okay? Then I have the description of the list and the title, right? Now, the order doesn't really matter, but I guess it would be logical to start by giving it a template, a title, and then a description, right? So maybe if I were to do this over, I would have done it that way. Notice as I edit this that each line ends in a comma, and that the last bracket is not preceded by a comma. All right, you notice that? And so I can move things around as long as I keep that in mind. All right, every line ends in a comma. And the last line before the final squiggly does not. Okay, and notice that all of my descriptions, so these semicolons, it reminds me of patch so much, right? Because when you're patching in Power Apps, you have a column name followed by semicolon and then a value. In this case, it's a property name and then by semicolon and then a value. Notice that when I'm passing numbers, I do not put those single quotes. And when I'm passing true and false, I do not put those single quotes. So true, false, and numbers, no single quotes around them. Just about everything else, yes, single quotes around them, okay? And what properties that you can pass totally depends on the type that you're working with, okay? And again, I will share a link with you that shows you all the types that are available, or I'll at least give you a link to the most popular ones, okay? So basically this is the body and this is what's going to make the magic happen. So I'm going to get a new SharePoint list of base type 100, which is custom. It's going to be called list name. Its description is going to be my list description. And in the list settings, the content types will be allowed and content types will be enabled. Okay. All of that happened just in this one body. The only exception I did in real life is instead of putting the list name manually between those two single quotes, I actually did use my variable. So again, anything before the HTTP requests, you can leverage in your body. All right, that was easy enough. Let's test it and see if it works. Remember, it's going to first ask me what I want as a list name. So let's go ahead and test it and say I perform the trigger. I could also do this from my phone because I made it a button. All right, let's call this list Audrie Hack 1, okay? And we'll run this flow. What should happen is the flow should run very smoothly, very quickly, as it did. And if we go back to our SharePoint site, let's do that in Edge. It makes it a little bit easier for me to find things if I put them in separate browsers for this video. If I go to that site, which is the planning team site, you will notice that we have a new list in there called Audrie Hack 1. Notice it was just added today at 6:44 p.m. So it worked. Yay! All right, now, what if we wanted to take it one step further and add a column to that list, right? Remember back in the day, like 3 years ago, we had to use PowerShell to create list replications, right? Or STP. Now we can do this with this HTTP action, right? So I did a separate flow. By the way, all I did was save as that create flow and tack on the words with column so that the first actions are already done. They're identical to what I showed you earlier. The only thing I added was a delay of 1 minute. Now, it's not required. Let's delete it now and see if we do just fine. Sometimes I'll put delays in whenever I'm editing something that was just added. And the reason is, who knows what's happening on SharePoint today? Is there a lot of activity? Is there any queuing? So sometimes I might add a minute delay in between. But let's see if this runs without that delay. After all, it is Saturday evening and most people are out dancing, right? So let's do a quick test, and let me just first show you the code, sorry. So I am doing another HTTP request that I've renamed to SharePoint for a new column. And basically you can see that this is also a post. Again, we are changing something on SharePoint. We're adding a new column, so most likely post. And then we have to tell it where the fields are. Like we're looking for fields here, but we need to say, how do we get to the right list for the fields? Now, in this case, I used get the list by title. So API/web/list, and then get by title. And I need those quotes. And now I'm going to pass that list name because I've been using it all along anyway. So I can continue to use it to find the right list. And then I want to add /fields. Now, an important factor here that you'll want to keep in mind is that you could also do it by GUID. But in this case, I didn't have access to the GUID in my previous actions, so I'm finding it by list name. Again, I'm using those very same headers that I was talking about earlier. They're awesome headers. I just use them again. I noticed that I'll need more usually when I'm updating something that exists on SharePoint. But again, I'm adding something. I don't think I'll need to do anything else, right? So these two headers here, application JSON, semicolon, OData equals verbose, are good enough. And that does say verbose. So if I hit this, you can see it spelled out, right? It's not like an E on a line by itself. And then here's our body again. So very similar to before, we have the metadata to start us off. And then this time we're not working with lists. We're actually working with the field. So we're working with sp.field. Again, this does align with our URI because our URI is pointing to fields. And so we have a type field. I very rarely see that those do not align. So usually your type will be somewhere in your URI. Okay, now again, these names here on the left in single quotes followed by semicolon are properties directly related to SP field. And again, I will give you a link to where you can look and find out what properties are related to SP field, but I'm showing you my favorite. You don't even need all of these to create the field, all right? So one of my favorite things about this one, guys, is unlike real SharePoint, I can set the title and the internal name to be different right away. I don't know how many of you have been typing the internal name without a space and then going back and change it to space because you don't want those messy encoded URLs. But in this case, you can just decide that your title is going to be X and your internal name is going to be that. And you can do that in one action. I really love that. Here's my list description. And here's my field type kind. Again, this is a number that represents the type of the column. Okay, so let me show you that. So I'm going to go back to Edge and go to another one of my shortcuts that will be in the description, and you'll see that there's all these different field types, right? And so I'm using 2, which will be text. I could have used 9, which would have been a number, or 10, which would have been currency. So these numbers are not rocket science, guys. They're just the way that we've encoded this in the back end so that it's easy for the HTTP request to pass the right information to SharePoint. It doesn't think like us humans. It has its own little code system. So it does take a little getting used to find out where you get these links. But once you have the links, you know, it's easy peasy. All right. Now, I've also decided that this column is going to be required. I've decided that you cannot submit to this list without giving me your cost code. And so I've set required to true. Again, if I didn't have that property there, it would be defaulted to false. I've also set hidden to false. Now, what's hidden? Hidden will mean that when they click new on that list, if something is hidden, it will not show up in one of the fields they get to type into. Okay, so in this case, we don't want it hidden. Now, I don't need to put that there, but I put it there for you to remember that you can set a field to hidden. And the most often reason why I will do that is because of my Power App. So I have a Power App somewhere, and I don't want them to edit that field in SharePoint directly. I only want them to edit it in my Power App. Then what I will do is make it a hidden field and surface that field only in Power Apps. Little side tip, okay? So let's give this a try. This doesn't seem too hard at all, right? To me, it's a little bit easier than PowerShell, right? Depends on how experienced you are. But let's name this Audrie Hack 2, which is just the list name. We're gonna run that flow. It started, it ran successfully, it's finished. We go back to SharePoint. Let's do that here. Planning team site. Okay. And then I should see that second list in here. Audrie Hack 2. Now this list is different than the first one in that it should also have another column. Now what we don't do is we do not damage your views. We don't know what you're doing to your views, right? So we don't put them in view, but they are on the list. So if I wanted it to show up in this default view, I would edit my current view. And there's course code. I can easily add it to the views that I want to add it to. Okay, really cool, really easy. That was number 2. Let's move on to number 3. So I'm going to go back here and we're going to talk a little bit about hyperlink fields. Okay, so this is hack number 3. I'm using a button, and this time I'm asking for the list ID. And this has to do not with the list itself, but the item of the list that I want to change, okay? So let me explain this. I guess I should explain this first. So I'm going to go to the contractors list here in this site and just head over there to contractors. And you will see that I have a column here called website. Website. You can easily use our SharePoint connector to set a URL to a column, right? But it will set the whole URL. Like it will say http://www.microsoft.com. And so a lot of people have said to me, hey, Audrie, I don't want these long URLs in my SharePoint column. I want like a click text, right? That if they click on it, it goes there. So we're going to change this first one using flow. And so that's ID number 1. All right. So let's go back to our flow and look at that a little closer. This is going to be 1 when we test this. All right. And maybe I'll spell this out. This is the item number. Okay. And this right here is my click text. So please enter the text you want them to click on. So what we've got here is a chance to add on top of the link some click text. Okay, and I scroll down here. Again, this is a post action. Very similar to what we did earlier. We do need to get to an API/web/list, but we need to find a particular list and a particular item. So in this case, that prefix works just fine, API/web/list, but then we're going to get by title again, and this is the contractors list. Yes, this could have been dynamic, but this is always the contractors list, so I hard-coded it. Then it wants to know what item. I could have put a number there. I could have put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, excuse the noise, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which represents the ID of the list. But in this case, I'm going to use what they passed in the trigger. Okay. Then now you'll notice something different here. We've got these 2 new headers that we haven't talked about. I find that these headers are used whenever I am looking and updating, looking for something, updating something. I find these 2 headers useful. So you'll learn to get used to these the more you do, but those 2 are useful when you're looking for something, like we're looking for a particular ID and we're updating something. So we have to kind of make sure it's updated. All right. Now let's look at this text here. This one's a little bit more complicated. And the reason is because the website column in SharePoint is a complex column. So let's just go back there and look at this list again. And we'll look at the website column. And this website column has been created as a hyperlink field. And all hyperlink fields are complex columns, right? So they have some nesting. And I'll just do a quick edit here so you can see. When I click on, let's just move over there. When I click on the website, I get 2 values. I get a URL and I get display text. And because of that, this is complex. So you're going to see some nesting in our flow, right? So first we go into our metadata. And this time we're going into SharePoint data into the contractors list item. Again, you see the alignment between the URI and this type. They aren't identical, but you can see that they're aligned. They're the same thing. One is pointing to a particular list and a particular ID, and one is pointing to a particular list and a particular item in that list. Okay. Now, the next thing it wants to know is what is this column name? So this is the complex column right here, which is called website. Now, because this is complex, we're going to have another nested group here, right? Because we have to pass more than one value because it's a complex field. So we have another set of those same tags that we've been using so far. All right, and this time the metadata is type SharePoint.field URL value. So we're going into a field that has a URL value, and we're going to pass 2 things. The description, which is the click text, right? We got that up here when we asked them, what do you want them to click on, right? And then after that, we're passing in the actual URL, which will be what will happen when they click. This nested group right here can therefore be closed, and then this final squiggly closes everything. This is probably the most complex of the hacks today, and it's because website, this right here, is a column on SharePoint that's complex because it has a description and a URL, right? And so we had to do 2 groups of metadata here. Okay, let's give it a try. That wasn't too hard, was it? It's a little challenging, but I think we got it. I'm going to hit test, and I'll perform the trigger. Now, it's asking me 2 things. What's the list ID? So let's go back here to this so I can pick a list ID. Let's change this first one here So I'm going to edit this and find out that that's list ID number 1. Okay. So in my test, where's my test? What happened to my test? Hold on one second. Okay. I'm going to do list ID number 1. And what do I want them to click on? I want them to see, please click here. And I don't think any other row said that. That's why I picked that. It's probably too long, but hey. All right, now I'm going to run the flow. Now the URL could have been dynamic as well, but you did notice that I hard coded it. That went very fast. Let's go back to our contractors list and just refresh it. And then we're going to scroll over on number 1 here. And you'll see that the website says, please click here. And when we click there, it goes to www.microsoft.com. Super, super easy, right? Okay, next hack. Let's do the next hack. And of course, those of you that are saying, no, Audrey, this ain't easy, I want you to know we're working to get the actions for you into the connector, but it may take some time. Be patient with me. In the meantime, I will make sure that you have a good understanding of the workarounds. That's my promise to you. All right, so we did, how many hacks have we done? We've done 1, 2, 3. So our 4th hack. Have you ever wanted to set a user into a group, like into a SharePoint group? Have you ever wanted to do that? I do sometime. And there's no actions in our SharePoint connector that says, put user in SharePoint group, or doesn't have anything about groups, right? So sometimes in order to put someone in a group, I can use this sequence of events. So again, I'm manually triggering it and I'm asking them for the group ID of the SharePoint group. And all of you who said, what the heck are you talking about? Let's go back to the planning team site and let's go into site permissions and into the advanced permissions. And when we go into the advanced permissions, you're going to see your different groups. Click on the one you want to use, and then on the end of it, of the URL, and I'll just move this into Notepad as well so you can see it bigger. A lot of URL hacks in SharePoint. One of the things I like about SharePoint. At the end of the URL, when you're looking at the group itself, is the membership group ID. In this case, it is number 4. All right. So when you're updating a group, you need the site name and the membership group ID number. And that's how you find it. Just go there, then look up at the URL. It's going to be at the end. Okay, let's go back to our flow. So we've collected that through a trigger. So this is me. This is my flow for me, right? If I want to add someone to a group while I'm on the bus on my way to work, I can open up my flow app. First thing it's going to ask me, what's the group ID? All right. Now, in here, right, I'm going to do the same thing we've been doing, right? I'm going to post because we're changing something on SharePoint. It's going to end up with something new, which is a person, right? Now, notice how logical these are, right? We're not API/web/list, and we're not API list. We're not API/web/finding a list. We are talking about site groups, right? And so we're talking about groups. So it wants to know which one, and that's where that group ID goes. And then we say users at the end of that, okay? Then after we do that, we got those same 2 fields. I'm not updating anything or changing anything. I'm adding a person to a group. So most likely I don't need any more headers, okay? So now I'm up to the body, and notice in my body, I've got a type of SharePoint user. Totally aligns with what I have in my URI. And now the user type has its own properties, and the only property we need to add a person to a group is the login name, okay? The login name. Now, the login name technically is the user principal ID. It's primarily their email address. This could be a dynamic field where you have Office 365 users looking up what the user's email address is, and you could pop that dynamic field in there between those single quotes. You still would need those single quotes there. But this prefix right here is because we're in the cloud and we're dealing with tokens. These are claims, right? So every email address must be prefixed by this text. Okay, so just memorize it. Put it in your OneNote. Fall in love with it. Marry it. Promise it a wonderful life with you. Don't forget it. And then just follow it with an email. Okay, so let's try this, right? So let's do a quick test of this. I'm just going to try and see if I can zoom out a little bit here so I can see more. And it's true that, because I zoom a lot, it's my vision, right? Sometimes I have to reset my screen because I zoom too much. I'm going to perform a trigger action here, which is give the group ID. I'm going to let it know my location. That has to do with the fact that I'm using the trigger manual trigger, which is always picking up my location. So I go ahead and set allow. I'm going to put the number 4 here because that's our group ID. And I'm going to run my flow. Okay, it's going to run really quickly. This is one of those fast flows, but high value. I love things that do things fast, but are very high value. If we go back to the people in groups and we refresh this screen on member group ID number 4, see that? This is the group ID for visitors. If I refresh this, you will now see me added. Now, what you got to remember here, right? What you got to remember here is it doesn't think, right? It does what you say. So it doesn't say, hey, Audrey, you're already an owner. Why are we adding you to the visitors group? This doesn't do any thinking. Exactly what you say do is what it will do. Okay, so it put Audrey right there in the visitors group. I love that. Okay, let's do the last hack. I know you're disappointed, right? Because this could go on all day long. And it could. There is so much you can do with this particular action that this could go on all day long. All right, so the last one I wanted to show you was creating a folder in a library. So creating a library is just like creating a list. So let me just show you these as a bonus, right? Notice that this is the same thing as lists because this is all SharePoint lists. It's just a different type. If I'm on a library, all I'm doing is changing the base template to 101. All right, so that would create a library. If I wanted to create a task list, the good old-fashioned task list, right? If I wanted that good old-fashioned task list, all I have to do is change my base template type to 107. So those flows are identical. You can just do save as, change your base type, change your name, and off you go to create that different thing. Just remember that when you do that, when you change your names, if you have anything that references, the other kind of thing, change it, okay? Please enter the name of your task list. Okay, so just to prove this, I'll save this. It is identical to the one we did for the regular list, right? Only we've chosen a template of 107. Let's test this. I'll perform it. Let's test it. Let's call it hacks task hacks. Okay, task hacks, and we'll run that flow. I need to take a peek as to what site that's going to. I think it's still the planning. Okay, then we'll go to the planning team site, click on site context, and you'll notice that task list, it's a special type of list. So it's not going to be alphabetized up here. It will be down here with the task list icon. There we go. And it just got added right now. Isn't that so super easy? So that's not the last hack. That was the bonus hack, right? Just to show you that, how you would create task libraries. You just change your base type. The last one I want to show you is how to put a folder in a library, okay? And so for this last one, basically, we're going to do a little bit different here. We don't need anything in our trigger because we're going to set a relative folder path. Okay, so I've created a variable that I've called relative path. It's a string, and I'm creating a relative folder path. Okay, so let's go back and look at this in SharePoint. So if I go here to SharePoint, okay, I think I can't do that. Yep, I can. All right, so now this is my library. So if I go to site contents, I have a library called marketing. It's right here, my marketing library. What I want to do is I want to put a folder inside this library. Okay, I believe you could do create file and stuff. I'm not sure if you can create folders. So this is, if you can, forgive me, but I've used this HTTP for creating a new folder. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go back to my flow. And this is the relative path to where I want the folder to be. Next, I go ahead and add my HTTP request. And since I'm just creating a folder, I can do API web /folders, right? So notice how it's pretty logical. When we were doing lists, we did API web list, but now we're doing folders, so we're doing API web folder, right? And all we have to do is this really short story here. If you look at this carefully, we're setting the type to folder, which totally matches or aligns with. It doesn't match, it aligns with our URI. Then I'm saying, take this server relative URL path, use that variable for the relative path, and then right here is the name of my new folder, okay? So let's just make it new folder, okay? Because whatever you type there, that's the name. Even if you use a dynamic field, but you will still have that straight quote after it, okay? And now I'm gonna save that and let's test it, okay? Really simple, right? You thought that was gonna be hard, didn't you? Ah, psych. All right, so I'll perform the action. There is none, but you know, I gotta choose something. I'm gonna run the flow. It's done already. It's ran beautifully. If I go back to my site, which is this the same site? No, this is Audrie's demos. So let me just copy this URL so I get to the right site. I might already be in the right site, but let's just make sure. All right, then I'm gonna do site contents. And then inside contents, I'm gonna open my marketing folder. How many of you can bet me $50 that there will be a folder called new folder? Come on, guys, nobody bet me? Okay, there it is, the new folder. That's how easy it is. I hope you enjoyed these 5 hacks, okay? These are things you can do with the new HTTP. Well, it's not new, it's recent though, because before we only had HTTP, which meant you had to figure out some claims and tokens or something like that. Now we made it a lot easier. If you can pick up on these patterns that I talked to you about, there's a lot you can do, all right? Remember to take some of those best practices. Notice that I'm prefixing my flows that are HTTP with the HTTP. If you have a naming protocol, it helps you when you start having hundreds of flows, okay? Fortunately, I have so many environments that I might not have hundreds of flows. The other thing that was a best practice I was sharing with you is that you can add details in your description, not only about what it does, but where is some reference material that could help that future person, you know, figure out what you did. Whatever you can do, I believe in knowledge sharing, knowledge management, add it in the description of your flow. And enjoy this stuff, okay? It looks hard, but it's not hard once you get into it. Enjoy it, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll be sharing more flow hacks with you over the course of the next few months. Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.